So this is a series where I get to talk with amazing people who make the world and the workplace better in some way. So I of course had to have you in my day. If you don't know Licia, they are a diversity inclusion specialist at Next Games, which is a part of Netflix, and they are such a vibrant, colorful person who brings such energy to the workplace. I needed to have you in my day because, as you know, you cannot rely on the Finnish weather for the sunshine. So, yes, thank you for being my sunshine today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say, though, this month has been unusually warm and sunny. So I'm not the only ray of sunshine, I think, right now. And I think people might be starting to get a bit too tired of rays of sunshine, to be honest.
Like, what is that? You gotta enjoy certain moments when you get them, seriously, you know? But you have, I'm sure, a lot of those moments because you help to create those at your workplaces. This isn't your first career. You've done loads of things. So I gotta know, what kind of tips could you have for anybody that's trying to reinvent or reposition themselves professionally? Because you've done it so well.
Well, first of all, thank you. Second of all, I think a big part of it is the fact that I'm able to articulate what I want very clearly. So I talk to actually quite a lot of people who want to do different things. They want to work in the game industry because I've been, for example, a member of Women in Games, now We in Games, and a board member of We in Games for 4 years. And so I meet a lot of people looking to break into the game industry, people who are looking to switch careers. And I meet a lot of people who are like, yeah, I can do X, Y, Z. And I'm always like, okay, great. But what do you want to do? You know, I can also kind of do a lot of things, but I'm not going to be creating joy for myself if they're not the things that I also want to do. And so in every situation where I've been in, where there's been kind of an opportunity for something I want, I've made it very clear to the person who's kind of gatekeeping that opportunity, like, hey, this is something that I want. This is something that I think would be a value add for your organization. And this is something where I think I can, also develop professionally. And part of it's also been luck, of course, that I've known where to find those opportunities. I've been in the right place at the right time. So I would say it's a mix of self-advocacy, luck, and then the work that I've done to make connections and brand myself as, someone who is reliable and kind and fun and all of those things. But I won't sit here and pretend that luck didn't play a part of it. I think a lot of people, when they get asked this question, they're like, I worked super hard. And it's like, yes, I did, but I was also, for some things, just in the right place at the right time. And I think it's really fair to acknowledge that, because if I wouldn't, I would be very dishonest. So,
I mean, it's kind of funny because you're saying in the right place at the right time. Right now, you're based in Helsinki, but for a while, you were out in the boonies for a bit.
Right. For 3 hours from Helsinki and not the best public transportation connections. But I've always had a very strong online presence. I've always been super active on social media. So I've always made myself known. And then I spent a lot of time traveling back and forth. So especially when I was trying to land the job, TM, the big job, if you will, I would go to basically every event there was. I spent a lot of money on just traveling to different places, which again, I know is a privilege, but I also didn't always have that money per se. But I spent a lot of money after, taking care of my responsibilities and stuff, going to conferences, going to events, really putting an emphasis on meeting people and being in the right place and making my presence known. And it did pay off after a while. But even before that, before I was in games, I worked for the Multicultural Association of Satakunta, which was an NGO that helped immigrants kind of get integrated into Finland. And before I got hired there, I was volunteering there. So I volunteered there for almost 2 years, got to know everybody, again, made myself known as the reliable, good-natured person. And then when there were opportunities, I was the first to know because I was volunteering. And then I made it clear that I wanted to, be employed there. And so I got the job. So it takes a lot of work, but also, for example, I don't have a degree in anything, right? I have a high school diploma and that's it. And then I've done some I've done some university courses in like the Polytechnic school, but like I don't have a degree. All of this has been done by my own work and then making my work known. And I am extroverted, but I'm also very easily tired. So like, I would do these things and then I would go home and then I would sleep for like a day and kind of avoid everybody for like a day because I would need to recharge my social batteries from all the networking. But it is a path. And I've always kind of been very upfront about the fact that that is a path. If you are good at something and passionate about something and reliable, if you do the work and if you get lucky in terms of being in the right place at the right time, then good things will happen to you.
I love this. And I have to say, I actually think about people in the games industry, and I know a number of really, really talented people who are fantastic at what they do. And some are even like director levels, and they don't have degrees, by the way. I've heard so many folks think that, they need to get that piece of paper to be able to get started the thing that they want to do. And there's so much learning that you can do by doing the thing that you want to do, And it's not always going to be the prerequisite that you have to go and get that 4-year degree. But it's the great thing for some people who want to do that. Fantastic. But that's not a mandatory door for everybody,
No, no. And I think the most important thing is that you're doing something. So even though I don't have a degree, that doesn't mean that after high school, I just, did nothing for every day. I was still active with volunteering. I've been a community manager for a very long time. I've been moderating forums since I was 12. So even when I was unemployed and not in school, I was still doing a lot of volunteer work in different capacities, which does translate into skills. There's a TikToker I follow who also was, recently posed a question by a teenager, like, okay, how do I get my first job? I don't have a degree. And she was also like, okay, but like, can you use TikTok? Can you use Instagram? Are you good at navigating these things? Because you can probably find some small local business who needs help with this. And maybe it doesn't pay right away. Maybe it is a few weeks of volunteering, but it's still professional experience. And, of course, it's important to not get exploited. But also, if you're just looking for your first name to put down as like, hey, I worked for Mom and Pop's Bakery managing their Instagram account, and your dream is to be a social media manager, that's solid experience. That's, managing a content calendar. That's working with the stakeholders to figure out what content works. That's learning how to use the different tools. So it all falls into place. And for me, based on my own experience, and then also based on speaking with a lot of my friends who are hiring managers, that kind of stuff matters more than a degree. Of course, a degree is good for certain fields like programming. A bachelor's is enough just so they can be like, okay, yeah, so you understand the basic fundamentals of, computer science or mathematics or whatever. But then it gets to a point where if you're farther enough in your career, they don't even care about it. Like, no one's looking at your degree. Like, if I would leave Netflix right now, no one's gonna be looking at the education part of my resume, right? So it's really good in the beginning, kind of, but again, as you said, it's definitely not the be all end all. And I'm never going to tell people not to get an education because that's bad advice. But also don't feel like your life is over if you don't feel like you can handle school, or if you didn't make it into school, or if school just seems like it's not accessible to you, because there are other pathways.
Absolutely. And one thing to consider is that, obviously learning and education are not the same things. And even education has so many different paths to being able to get that. So, always try to grow yourself, always try to increase your learning and your knowledge and your understanding of things. That is something that's indisputably going to help you out in your life. But the way that you do that, so many different paths being able to do that. I love that you brought up your community manager, because somebody actually pinged me and they're asking, I work in DEI as a researcher, and they're asking me, hey, I'm a new community manager and I am looking to try to do right by DEI in my new role. Okay. And I gave some suggestions and such, but I just realized you are this fountain of knowledge and resource. You've been a community manager for 20 years or so. How would you suggest that community managers could do better by more people?
I would say, first of all, if they're not part of any communities like Fair Play Alliance or other kind of online communities for community managers and for trust and safety and for player support, they should immediately join those. Because I think you can often feel like, especially in a team or in a company, you know, you're the player facing voice and you're the only one and you're alone and you're in this weird place between the team and the company and the business and then the players. But there are hundreds of thousands of people just like you out there who've been through the things that you've been through and who are dealing with them right now. And so you are not alone. And so talking to them and asking their best practices, what's currently working for them? You know, how are they approaching inclusion in the community? How are they approaching harassment? How are they approaching all of these things? It doesn't make you a bad community manager. Quite the opposite. It makes you better because you are actively trying to improve. I don't think anyone expects you to have all the answers right away. And it's totally reasonable to join a community of professionals doing the same thing you do and share knowledge, just like we do with DEI. I think the other thing is to really set out a clear kind of code of conduct or set of principles for your spaces. So whether they're your in-game spaces or your kind of Discord servers or your forums or whatever you're going to have, just having a very clear established code of conduct, making sure that any kind of volunteer moderators you have are also on board with that, making sure that everything is as clear as it can be. You have examples of the bad behavior. I think a lot of times things go off the rails. They'll have rules that's like, rule 1, don't be a dick, or rule 1, be kind. And it's like, okay, cool, but what does that actually mean? Because don't be a dick to me means something very different probably to somebody from a different background. Cool. So having kind of clarity here is a really important thing, and also gives your players or your users more understanding about what kind of behavior is expected of them. And through that, you can do things with a clearer DEI lens, I would say. And then also just basic stuff. So not tolerating, you know, homophobia, not tolerating racism, not tolerating transphobia, all of these things is a given. And then also normalizing it. So normalizing having pronouns, normalizing people being able to speak up and share things if there's something in the game or in the server that's problematic, lowering that threshold and that bar to contacting someone about things, I think is really essential. You know, having like these different mechanisms, but yeah, the number one thing is to talk to other people and you know, get advice from them, because again, you are not alone, and there are many people who walked in your shoes.
When I first heard about community management, it was more like a new term for that role, I would say, for a lot of different companies, maybe like 20 years ago and such. That was definitely what I was interested in. And I think I applied to like nearly every games company in the Bay Area. And then when I moved to Germany, like in the Berlin tech scene and such, I did actually get some responses back, but I was not a very good cultural fit, apparently. So that was a thing I realized. I wasn't part of the club, especially in Germany. Like, you know, they have different kinds of things where you go out for beers with your team, and I don't drink. And I just wasn't exactly a good fit, right? And I remember thinking, that's really, really sad, though, that it's a space sometimes that could feel like if you're not there, there's no room for you to ever be there, that kind of thing, you know? But the industry has definitely evolved a lot in like 2 decades. And I would say there's been a lot of progress. You've been in it directly for quite some time. You've been researching a lot of it. But from you, like from your standpoint, from the work that you've done with the organizations that you're in, what do you think has been like the biggest areas of progress that you've seen? And like, where do you think we could still grow and do better?
I would say that especially in Finland, gender equality has improved quite a bit. So numerically, we're still not at like a great number in terms of the amount of women and non-binary people like working in the industry. But in terms of how the issues are talked about and how they're approached, I think we've come a long way. And I think the industry's understanding of diversity has grown a lot, because I remember when I joined the Finnish game industry in 2016. You know, I am a queer immigrant who is like a second generation immigrant already in the US. So like I have all these layers and you know, come from a poor family, you know, not part of this ESPO bubble kind of thing. And so when I joined the industry and I would hear, kind of Finnish women talking about how we need more Finnish women representation, I felt excluded because I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, I get you and I'm not trying to invalidate you, but like, what about literally everybody else? So I think we've come a long way in terms of understanding that diversity doesn't just mean more women who went to the same schools and lived in the same neighborhoods and were even part of the same social circles originally as the men, but that also it means foreigners. It means LGBTQI plus people. It means people from the countryside. It means people who weren't traditionally part of these, people who weren't born and raised to have a comfy middle class job, who weren't bred to be there. You know what I mean? Having as much room for outsiders as possible. I think we are seeing more and more of that again. I don't necessarily know if we're at a perfect place, but I think, if I compare to 2016, I would say it's just the understanding of the issues is night and day. There are several companies now who have DEI roles. Ours, Next Games, Rovio, I know, has like a full-time DEI person. More and more companies have steering groups. More and more companies have ERGs. Like, these are things that were completely unheard of when I joined the industry. And what's been interesting has been, at least publicly, there's been basically like no pushback. There's been incidents, of course, but there hasn't been this big discussion in a long time about like, is this necessary or what are we doing? We in Games did a survey. Was it 2 years ago on, or no, it was a year and a half ago. Time is a void. On kind of the state of diversity and inclusion in the game industry. And I think out of several hundred responses, we only got one that was like aggressively critical of kind of the whole thing. Yeah. Of course, there were some people who had more questions, but I think there was only one person who was like aggressively like, this is a bad thing. And I feel like if you would have done that same survey in 2016, it would not have been like that. So I think we should all be proud. I think everyone who's been working in the game industry in some capacity to get it where it is now should be proud of the work they've done, because I think we haven't even kind of scratched the surface in a lot of ways, yet we've already made so much progress. So, yeah.
It's actually really something to compare the before and after, but then also I look at comparing the industry. So I work with primarily games and tech companies. And when I look at how they deal with certain kind of, challenges, to see how the games industry has really just taken it on themselves to be able to address some of the issues. I think there are also some more public issues that happened in games companies in the States that they wanted to make certain didn't happen so much here.
Yes, that was also a really big thing. Like, I think there were some very high-profile cases in the U.S. that many Finnish companies took to heart. Yeah. Not to say that things like that couldn't happen here, but I think the kind of leaders and founders here were especially sensitive and especially wanted to avoid this kind of problem here, which I'm super grateful for, because it's translated into many wonderful things.
I like that we took the idea of we need to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in this context. I do like that we want to do that. We're like, hey, we don't want what a lot of people think of it as importing DEI from the States. But the problem is when we start thinking of it as addressing like American problems versus thinking of it to address like Finnish problems or local problems and that sort of thing. That's the thing that oftentimes can turn a lot of people off when they start thinking of, oh, this is something that is just, something that corporate is dropping on us or something that we don't really need here or is not really part of our culture. But they don't necessarily see the local opportunity all the time, to be able to address it.
Yeah, and I think this has been, especially this summer, with this whole discussion in the Finnish media around DEI. And I wrote a LinkedIn post about this because I actually think very strongly we should be able to criticize DEI, but not the concept of DEI, but rather the implementation of how we're implementing DEI. So if you're trying to do a one-to-one import of an American training or an American concept to Finland, you are going to lose people because you're missing the cultural context, you're missing the local nuance, you're missing kind of the connection of, okay, so how does that impact us and our company and our industry here? Because there is a lot of overlap, but also if you miss the point where you are kind of connecting it to the person who's being taught, meeting them at their level, meeting them where they're at, then you are going to lose people. They're going to stop listening, and they might even become resentful because they're like, okay, you're interrupting my day with this and I don't know what to do with it. So now I'm just sad and I know about all the problems of the world, but I have no idea how to connect it to anything I do. So when I say we should be critical of DEI, I don't mean we should be critical of diversity and equity, because like what? But what I do mean is that we should be critical of how we're talking about these things, and we should be willing to, as kind of DEI leaders, be able to kind of check each other also as well to make sure that we're representing the common mission and the common goal in a way that is beneficial for what we're after. Because I have seen, and also I have in the past myself, not, maybe given this the proper amount of local context that I would want to. And I've also seen, people around me doing the same, and thus kind of turning people off from the whole movement because that was their first encounter with this. And their first encounter was so kind of negative and off topic that they were like, okay, I don't know what this is. I don't understand it and I don't like it. And so I think it's really important that those of us working in this space are very mindful of this and are constantly learning and constantly checking each other and sharing with each other and making sure that, we aren't just importing DEI, because it does happen. And I'm sure that someone is going to take a clip of this and then put it on like 4chan and be like, see, they admit it. But like,
but no, honestly, the funniest thing is, all right, so I work with global companies and I do a lot of the research and auditing when it comes to like the internal processes and how they're doing for responsibility and, diversity, equity, inclusion also is part of this. And one thing I always see, especially when we're subcontracting, and let's say, for instance, they are using some off the shelf product or something like this for a survey that they've got from America, and they want to implement this across their various offices around the world. It is the worst. Like, I've seen things like they'll have these surveys where it's asking for ethnicity, right? And it's an American survey, and they'll have one question. It's like, hey, are you Hispanic, Latino, specific ones for the states that they'll use in terms of terms, right? Now, fun thing is you're running the survey in Spain and you're running this survey in Portugal. And it's really interesting because people were like, all right, so what do we check in this case? Like, do you consider us to be, or are we just generically white, or are we not? Yeah. And there was some weird things. And they had such a big, issue trying to just get through that first kind of question that was asked, that a lot of them just decided not to even do the survey. Like, this is obviously not meant for us here. Yeah. And then even when they had that, some people responded to it, it was so skewed in terms of the data because it's basically analyzing the American context. And you see that you have, 40% of your people identify as being, Hispanic or Latino or things like this, then that throws off your data. It's not that they're actually minorities where they are,
Yeah. And you actually end up, if you import that to a European context, you actually end up erasing a lot of cultures and a lot of people who are, yes, white, but very clearly not in the majority group where they are. So when you talk about it in that context, it's accidental white supremacy because you actually are reinforcing this idea. No, really, because you're reinforcing this idea of this one unified white culture and white race that doesn't exist. So it's very problematic, I would say.
It's a thing that you see over and over again. So I almost always encourage people to not say don't use the American ones, but
really think closely about why you want to use it. Yeah.
Exactly. Because I think it's very, very possible that from the DEI standpoint, from the States to Europe, there's this feeling that, hey, we created this is ours. And so the definition of it is as we define things to be. And that the scope of what we're looking at, the things that we're prioritizing are, things that are important to us with the context that we have. And it somehow just completely overlooks the fact that there are so many different contexts, so many different histories, especially when we talk about equity, and equity is about fairness. And oftentimes when you're talking about things like social justice, you can't talk about that without understanding what the local context is. Justice means you have to understand the history. Justice means you have to kind of consider, what's the context things exist in, right? So without doing that, then clearly you can't really achieve one of your major goals that you have within that space. So it's a strange thing. It's a really, really strange thing to see how that works or translates. And I do recognize it's a weird thing that we're talking about this as Americans.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's
we've been
true.
living
Like,
here. We've been living abroad. I mean, I've been living abroad for 13 years as of last week.
wow,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and actually today is the 5-year anniversary of me getting Finnish citizenship. So, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
what I mean was that, like, I think being American actually gives us that perspective, because I think a lot of people, if I wouldn't have the American context about this, I might actually feel differently about it. I might actually also be one of the skeptics. Not totally, obviously. I'm not like my values as a human being wouldn't change, but maybe you know what I mean. If I didn't have the American context and I'd be sitting here hearing people tell me that, the Finnish experience is the same as, let's say, the Ukrainian one just because of skin color, I would be like, okay, that is
Hmm.
certainly a take. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah, I know. These are things where, yeah, when we talk about like, learning, there always has to be some kind of, learning about the context that you're in. And whenever you go to a different country, a different culture, it's incredibly important, especially if you're going to try to bring any kind of advice or take or, understanding of something to those people, that you have to make sure you take the time to understand the people that you're talking to, understand the people that you're actually engaging with and their realities. Otherwise, you can sell information, but you'll never sell insight.
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, there's so much to do in the space in the fetish context. There's so much right now from the governmental side. They're having new anti-racism things going on, and I do wonder how those are going to go and how they're going to be orchestrated and implemented, honestly, in reality. But who knows?
I mean, I always try to assume positive intent, even when everything is telling me not to. So in
Yes.
this case, I want to believe that there is good intention behind what they're trying to do. So I trying to give credit where credit is due, but also, like you, very curious to see what actually comes of this, and how it's reacted to, and what kind of discussions it creates, because for the most part, I felt like while some of the DEI discussion has been imported from the US, I feel like a lot of the opposition has also been imported from the US. So it's been like a cycle of importing talking points and ideas. So it will be interesting to see how, especially supporters of the current government, react toward whatever the government comes up with. But trying to assume positive intent, and just hope that maybe we'll be surprised. Maybe something really great will come of it, and it'll be an awesome step forward. I do appreciate, again, credit where credit is due. I do appreciate that they say racism is bad. The bar is really in hell, I think.
That's
But credit where credit is due.
yeah, no, and it's really interesting. I think about how it gets played out here in this context.
Mm-hmm.
It's a strange thing. I remember hearing this one shop owner who was saying, I want to give more opportunities, folks, in our space. But the reality is, our clientele is racist. And so, if I were to hire someone here who, was a racial or ethnic minority, they would have a horrible experience. And that's why we don't hire people of color. And
Yeah.
we're going to perpetuate a lack of opportunity and not necessarily change the context that they have to exist in and not advocate for them
Yeah.
because that would be the nicer thing to do. It's the weird vibe.
It's like you can feel that, like, the intention there is good, but they don't quite understand that what they're actually doing is kind of only making it worse. So, like, it's a nice thing that they don't want to put someone through bullying and harassment, but they're also then not taking back or stepping back to think about, okay, so wait a minute, so I only hire people of a certain race, that's certainly problematic. And then also, I'm not challenging the people who are coming here to be better people. I have no faith in my customers to not, be awful. And then also, I'm then not, as the owner, I'm then not willing to kind of stand up for my employees. There's a lot of layers there. There's a lot of layers there. But I mean, I would, in that context, if I had a business and I knew that for some reason a big portion of my clientele, or actually, no, I can actually speak on this. This is something I'm uniquely qualified to speak on because I make Eurodance and I make retro music and I do a lot of gigs around the country in rural parts of Finland where there's not a whole lot of immigrants. And, those are kind of the parts of the country where nostalgic music is very popular and kind of this, like, we want to go back to the 90s. It's very popular. And I'm super grateful for everyone who listens to my music. But I have had a couple of parasocial relationships that I've had to actually cut off because, we've become friends on social media and I've started to see the things that have been posted. A lot of them have been quite racist and I've called it out and then I've deleted them at my own expense. I don't know if those people are going to listen to my music anymore or come to my gigs anymore. But that's also fine. That's fine. I don't do this for money. I do it for passion. And of course, if there are 5 fewer people listening to me a month on Spotify because they think I'm a crazy social justice warrior who doesn't like free speech or whatever, then that's okay. That's okay because at least I stood by my principles. But I of course I understand it can be quite difficult, I guess, if you have like a direct financial incentive and it's your principles or paying your electric bill. Then I understand that sometimes it can be a bit more difficult. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's quite easy to draw that line and kind of not placate people or not be like, oh, but that's just who they are. Like, no, I don't believe that people are inherently hateful. I think that's a learned and taught behavior and that can be manipulated very easily through clickbait and so on. So, but it's also on an individual level in my free time, it's not my job to program. I don't have the space for that. So it's easier to delete.
That just reminded me of something else. If your principles don't cost you anything, are they worth anything, Mm-hmm. So it's a weird thing when we start saying like, oh, principles are great when they're convenient, or if they don't have any, if there's no financial tie to it, that makes sense. But if we start saying that, we can't follow principles because it costs something, well, then are we basically saying those principles are worthless, It's a strange...
I do think there's a line as someone who grew up very, very like lower class and who had food insecurity, like that is not a position I would ever put myself in again, no matter how much I tried. Same thing with my own child as well. Like I would never put her in a position where I couldn't eat. So I wouldn't be quiet. Let's put it that way. I wouldn't be quiet if I had a financial investment to deal with someone who was against my principles. I would not be quiet. I would make every effort to find a way out of that situation. But I'm also, as someone who has been poor, I do understand that it is not always as simple as I'm not going to go to work tomorrow or I'm not going to do this anymore because I don't have savings. I don't have a backup plan. I don't have a place to go. I don't have a way to feed my child. And sometimes I do feel like it can be difficult in those ways. Like there is nuance there and there is like a class issue there as well that I think not always, but sometimes needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I am a kid that grew up on like we had government food and all that jazz too. So like I feel you on that one. But I think maybe that influenced me to try to not put myself in positions where my paycheck can be so heavily impacted by my, principles in that sense. And this is a very Detroit thing with me, by the way. I always have a side job or 2 side jobs or things like this, etc. I always have some kind of hustle such that if I do work in company, I have a bit more freedom to say like, well, if this doesn't align with my values, I can leave, I can go.
Mm.
Or if I'm working with I can choose clients because I try to build a situation or build a context for myself where, yeah, it'll hurt me financially, sure,
Right.
if you don't take something, but you don't put yourself in a situation where it's so precarious or so, where you are tied to compromise.
Mm.
And that's just me personally. I'm not a person who likes to compromise on the values so much. And I kind of do try to build my life around that.
I hear
But
you.
I definitely understand. And like, there are some people who it's a far easier choice, And I think,
Yeah.
for those of us who have that distance and that kind of comfort, ask more of the people who have that choice, where it's an easier one.
For sure.
And yeah, make it easier for other people to have that choice as well, I would say.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you, and I agree with you. And I'm definitely with you now. Now I'm in a position where I don't have to work with anyone who doesn't align in that way. And I would be able to, if I was working with someone who was totally on the opposite side of what I stand for, be able to just peace out. But maybe at the beginning of my career, that would not have been so possible, and then you'd be back kind of at square one, not really sure how to how are you going to how are you going to eat, how are you going to pay your electric bill, how are you going to do these things. And so it's great that and also I hear what you say also about always having a side thing, because like me too. I do not know how to rest, but also not everyone has those spoons. Not everyone has that. Maybe they're neurodivergent or otherwise disabled, and some people just end up where they end up. And so I try really, really hard to hear people out and, encourage them in this way. But I feel like I'd be irresponsible if I would tell people, yes, don't pay your bills, get into debt, and be hungry. But stand by your principles, because, it is a fine line. And it's also not a position I would ever wish on anyone as someone who's been there.
So much of our perspectives are shaped by our histories that we have, and so much of our advice and things that we give is shaped by the different experiences that we've brought with us to the table that we're at right now. I am curious how your history has shaped, your present right now. So you came from the States, you ended up, I don't know how you ended up here, by the way.
I was married.
A traditional reason for being in Finland, I should have guessed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got married super young. Because like I said, I came from, second generation immigrants, quite poor family. Only one of my parents worked. And my home life otherwise was very difficult and disruptive. And so I really wanted to get away. When I was a teenager, I started a tour with punk rock bands. I was disabled and underage, traveling the country with, different people and getting into all kinds of really weird adventures. And then I met my ex online. I moved here, and it didn't work out. But then when we split up, this was in 2013 when we split up, I decided that, I had already gotten like the resident permit. I didn't need to leave. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make this work. And, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I had no idea what this would mean. I was homeless for a short period in Finland, believe it or not. That's a thing that you can be. You can be homeless in Finland. Because believe it or not, immigrants do not get special like benefits or things that the average Finnish people get. I think I got one package of food from a church, and I got 300 euros from the social services, and that is it. They wouldn't even help me get a bed. So, wow. I did all these things myself through work and debt, and that's when I started volunteering. Oh. And that's when I started doing things, and it also gave me a really clear understanding of like what immigrants who are not here on skilled worker visas go through, because it's a very different experience, and it's something that, of course, not to downplay what people here on work visas experience and go through, but it's a whole different ballpark when you are out there and unemployed and you don't have any sort of backing here other than your ex-husband and their family. So I started to go to Finnish language school, and I just worked my butt off from there. And it made me an empathetic person, oddly enough. Normally you hear these stories and then it turns into like, and you can too, and bootstraps and whatever. But in my case, no, it actually made me very empathetic because I was able to see all of the different kinds of people who were in the language classes with me. Hear their stories, hear what they go through, learn about their cultures, learn about how they got here, learn about the struggles that they have, integrating into Finland, and then also being seen in Finland and being taken seriously in Finland. It was also a crash course in privilege in a lot of ways. It forced me to confront a lot of things that I didn't always understand super well. I'd always been, in my head, I'd always been very anti-racist, very social justice, very like LGBTQIA friendly. Like I was all these things. But I think going through language school with all of the other unemployed immigrants really helped me understand a lot of things. And then so, like I said, I got that job at the Multicultural Association, which also helped me learn more and more about different people. I worked with refugees. I was volunteering during the refugee crisis, helping them out, especially like the women and the children. And I got into games after that completely by accident and serendipitously. But so I think I have a very unique background when it comes to people working in tech in general, and especially games. And I think, like I said, my background has made me empathetic. My background has made me very passionate about helping people. My background has made me very passionate about showing people that there are alternative paths to following your dreams and doing what you want in spite of the universe just constantly throwing you curveballs. But also, like I said, a certain level of responsibility and a certain level of kind of like, okay, make sure you've got your shit together and then then do the crazy things. Don't be like me and do things without any plan because it doesn't always work out. I think I got very lucky, but I would not recommend any of this to anyone without having a plan. So I think that's where, we were talking before about principles and cautiousness and all these things. I think it's just an overreaction on my part of being like, okay, please, 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 like, do not get yourself into my position.
Yeah. I think how many people in the DEI space are actually just trying to make certain that people don't end up in the same crappy situations that they've ended up in. I think like so many of us are actually just trying to like solve some of the problems that we've experienced, and we're like, this is a horrible experience. Let's not do this again. Let's try to do better in that sense.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's it. I've always said myself, nothing I do in relation to accessibility or DEI is about me. I'm already here. It's about everyone that comes after me and making sure that things are better for them and that they don't have to go through what I went through.
Absolutely. I was talking with Miss Smith Sanchez about.
Oh, she's great.
I know she's fantastic. We have this conversation about, like holding the door open for the people that come behind you. And that's an important thing, And she was saying, like, you got to shorten the path for others to make certain that, like, if you've already come a certain way and you know how to make it easier for someone else, then that's kind of almost like a moral obligation to try to do so. I absolutely agree with that. I definitely think that we have to make sure that we are, like, holding that door open, making certain that we can help other people get to at least as far as we've gotten, and then see if we can push them further to wherever they're going to go beyond us, I would love to see more people in our space think about how do we open the door for others. And sometimes you can get a lot of gatekeeping. There is a lot of gatekeeping even in like the DEI space or organizational development or, whatever kind of roles, any kind of thing where you get to a place of, quote unquote privilege or comfort. There's this protectionist vibe that can kick in where you're like, hey, I've got it good and I know how hard it is out there. Let me hold on to what I've got to make sure that, no one can take something from me.
Yeah.
But I would love for other people to think about how do we make certain that we can change this context where we're not all fighting over scraps, and we can actually make certain that it's not a matter of people taking things from you, but trying to see how can we expand what there is to offer. How can we expand to make certain that there are more people who can have access to that and build more opportunities in general throughout the way?
And also, I don't think anyone's taking anything from anyone. Like we were talking before we turned on the recording, how, no one can be a subject matter expert in every aspect of DEI. There is always going to be someone who knows more than you.
Mm-hmm.
And, oftentimes those younger, newer voices, they have a brand new perspective. And because they have more free time, they actually might even have more knowledge about what is the current topic, what is the current kind of zeitgeist around a specific issue. And so I think we're only doing our community and those around us kind of a disservice by not making space for the newer voices and making space for the people who might know more than we do and might be able to shed more light on topics. This is something I experienced when I first joined the industry. I did not make a ton of friends in the beginning, like I said before, because I kind of did call out the fact that a lot of the spaces were very gate kept, and we were doing a lot of things for diversity, but it was all a very specific group of people who, from my perspective, had a ton of privilege. And rather than kind of seeing me and the other people who started around the same time I did as, new energy into the team, like the next generation, let's go, let's do it together, it was immediately like, no, you can't come to our book club kind of thing. And I do recognize that I at times maybe wasn't the most easy person to work with in that way, and I do apologize if I offended anyone back then. But also, you know, um, I was just a very passionate young person who really wanted to make change, and I'm still passionate, but also I have vowed to never perpetuate that. So I definitely want to see a world where we don't repeat the mistakes of the people who came before us in that way, and that we can, make that path to knowledge sharing and to community and everything as short as possible.
It takes so much intentionality around that, because it is so easy to go for what's easy, right? I think that I realized, so my company, Validate, we're often subcontractors. So we do subcontractor research. We don't often get original contracts, particularly not in not in the Finnish context, right? So what would happen would be things like there will be the request for tenders, right? And so they will ask for different kinds of bids for service, and they'll say, hey, this is the thing that we have, the problem we're looking to solve, this is how we approach it. And I've actually been the subcontracted, researcher on projects that, like multiple projects that are competing for the same project.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see, like, how, for instance, if you work with, a company that might have a white Finnish male, I've seen them charge like 2.5 times the amount for the same service that I would be delivering, basically. 2.5 times the amount that some of the women-owned companies would have. And then the ones that are foreign-owned, very different, the price tag that they'll attach to it and such. And you'll see, despite the service being exactly the same, certain people get that contract. And if you're a subcontracted person who is going to think about, like, where are you going to get the most money? It's so easy to just say, okay, well, I'll just work with this privileged demographic here because that's where I'll get more contracts and I'll get more revenue. But the reality is you have to actually I have to budget into my life, and I'll say, look, I know it costs me money. I know it will be something where I won't make as much, but I have to say, like, well, 50% of my work contracts, I want to make certain that we're working with female-owned businesses. I want to make certain that we're working with, immigrant-owned businesses as well, that we work with people of color, people with different abilities. And these are things that, in my annual accountability, I look at these things, make sure that we're doing right in a very meta way for this field that we're in. But it takes things and it costs things, and it's not something that you can pull off for free, to be honest,
Yeah, and it also, like, you have to pay attention, and you also then have to be willing to check your own biases and also check encourage those around you to check their biases when they're looking for these kinds of services as well. That, okay, are we choosing this partner because they speak a language that we speak, because they went to the same university as us, so they understand, what we want to hear? Or are we choosing someone to work with because they are objectively the best for this, and because by choosing them, we are also giving them the opportunity to say that they worked with us. Like there's a lot of layers there. And I think being very intentional about it is super important.
Thing like I also realized that I tend to work with companies that are more scale ups, where they have financial incentives for addressing organizational problems. Oftentimes they might be going for a new round of funding, or maybe there's been some acquisition or something like this. But usually at the A round or so, the investors start getting interested in making sure that you don't have too many people problems that will blow up into things that might take them to court, might ruin their brand, things like this. A lot of the problems are the same problems that you're going to see across companies, things that they could have addressed years earlier, things that could have addressed at stages that were, easier to fix. But at those stages, no one looks at those. It's not like people are out there supporting the startup ecosystem in a sustainable way for that organizational development side of things, or the culture side of things, or the DEI side of things. Most of them don't have like dedicated people persons in their organization until a bit later.
Or if they do, it's somebody's like, just
it's
whoever.
Somebody's partner, and who's a really nice person, and they're really a wonderful human being. Are they competent in what they're doing? Probably not. To be honest. I mean, so, and these are things where you see that happening, but as a professional, I think about how much time can I allocate to try to talk with those kind of earlier stage companies, because the budget's a very, very different thing when you're working with, a $1 billion company versus a company that's trying to just take it like an extra 3 months to stay alive. So you have to think about how can you build in for the things that will cost you. Some stances, some things will cost. And if you want to stand on principle, then you got to make certain that you plan on principle as well, and that you budget on principle as well.
And well, that's the thing, right? Like when you budget it, and you know that this is going to be a thing that you prioritize, like with anything else, like with accessibility, like with, I don't know, even occupational health care, like all these things, when you know that you want to do things a certain way, you budget it and you prioritize it. But if you leave it to the last minute, or leave it until it's too late, then it just gets expensive, and then it becomes this big scary thing rather than this kind of organic thing that's just naturally part of the culture. So
and that's something, especially when it comes to accessibility, that is something that's definitely thought of as an add-on at the worst stages. They've moved into like new buildings, they've gotten to like new facilities and such. And you're like, if you had just thought about this beforehand, save yourself so much money,
This has happened to me twice, where I've been brought in as an accessibility consultant when they've already basically moved into the new office. And I've had to awkwardly be like, okay, thank you for thinking about this. It's great that you care, but we needed to have this conversation 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. Oh gosh. But these are things where I want to make certain companies think about things in advance, at a point where it's possible to make an actual difference, where you can, we talk about inclusion. There's that whole metaphor where people talk about like, oh, it's like being invited to dance and that sort of thing, right? I don't like that one. Like I don't work with those kind of companies where it's like, being invited to dance, because it's like you go into a place, you don't get to choose the music, and you don't get to choose anything like there. You just kind of go in and you're hoping someone reaches out to you to make it better for you when you're being invited to dance. I like potluck companies. I like companies where like, the value that you have as a company is actually what everybody's bringing in. Everybody brings in their own dish. Everybody's bringing in their own talents. Everybody's bringing in, their own personalities, their own flavors. And that is a thing that's the thing. If someone doesn't show up with their value, that affects, the whole thing, that the whole event is a lesser thing because people didn't bring in the diversity of flavors to that organization. And I want that as the inclusion, where it's not necessarily such that like, you have to wait for somebody to extend a hand to you and say, hey, come on and dance. Nah, this is the potluck, and, this is the cookout in that sense. You are bringing in the value. You are the value,
Exactly. Hey, I don't mean to interrupt you, but apparently people are waiting for this meeting room, so we have to end it. I'm sorry.
No, so sorry.
I'm so
Licia,
sorry.
thank you for being amazing. Thank you for being awesome. And I have to say, I appreciate you making time in your day. We can go on forever, clearly.
Yes,
Um,
clearly. Yeah.
but if anybody wants to reach out, what's the best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn, LinkedIn, Licia Prehn, just find me there.
You can find them there. They're fantastic. I'll link as well on like YouTube as well to you. Okay. But thank you so much for
Awesome.
being in my day. Have a good
Thank you
one.
so much for having me. Bye.
Okay. Bye.